Welcome to our first event. I've been involved with as the new CEO of QMCA, and obviously first it's a virtual event today, and we're having a discussion on local industry development and procurement as part of our construction projects. Today, obviously, we've got four key speakers. Ben Hughes from Ben Hotel, who's with me in the room. Kylie Porter from GW3, Phil Cooper from Uworkin, and Scott Stewart from Brisbane City Council. Before we get into the topic of today, I thought I'd quickly just run through where we are and what we're doing at the QMCA at the moment, what we're seeing. If you haven't been living under a rock, I think we'd all know that we've got the election on Halloween, 31st of October. We've taken the opportunity to develop a state election issues paper, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, but we've developed that with the Australian Construction Association, and we'll be releasing that later today. We've also been working on an update to our major projects and pipeline report. Obviously, many of our members will know that we do that jointly with IAQ. It's a very big event. Obviously, there was an initial one that was postponed from March. We've taken the opportunity to update the pipeline now with a particular focus on jobs. And we will be having an event on the 16th of October. It will be at the Hilton, and there'll be further details coming out on that. It'll be a live event as well as being an online, so a bit of a hybrid event. We've also been doing a whole range of engagement with our key stakeholders. That's around three key aspects. Our stakeholders being obviously all levels of government and the private sector. We're looking at and we're pushing with them the pipeline of works. At the moment, we're seeing a significant drop-off in construction work in Queensland. And that's reflected in the funded and committed pipeline of work going forward. At the moment, there's about 12,000 people directly employed across the construction sector in Queensland in our major projects. By 2024, that is dropping off to around 6,000 without further new projects being committed and funded, approved and brought forward. So that is quite a significant issue for us as an industry, and that's one that we're advocating very heavily on. We're also talking with our stakeholders around collaborative contracting elements. I think we're going to have quite an interesting discussion on that today as we link that with local industry engagement and industrial relations. So that leads us on to our election priorities. So we have three key themes around our election priorities. Sustainability of the industry, and that's two elements: a funded and committed pipeline of works. As I mentioned before, we're seeing a significant drop-off in direct employment, mainly because of all the work that's been brought forward or brought to market over the last year or so is going to start to dry up and complete from 2022 onwards. And that means that we need to backfill behind it to ensure that we've got sustainability in our industry. Construction is identified as one of those core industries that is required to help drive the economy forward, particularly out of the economic issues that we're in at the moment. So sustainability of that and a pipeline of work is vitally important. But equally as important is getting the industrial relations policy settings right. We need a balanced IR framework with policy settings that enable industry to be able to work productively. That means working in good faith with our employees and our unions. There's been some changes of late which have certainly swung the pendulum completely in the opposite direction. We need to bring it back into the centre so that industry can invest and work with our employees to deliver what we need to deliver. There are two elements of investment that we're really promoting and looking for. Investment in economic infrastructure. And what's economic infrastructure? Well, that's infrastructure that provides long-lasting benefits across the economy. It's intergenerational, and it enables the private sector to either co-invest with government or to invest and do development projects off the back of it. And that's across a whole range of different sectors: water, power, renewables, road, rail, etc. So there's a whole range of projects that or major investment opportunities in that economic infrastructure space that we've got in our election issues paper. And equally, investment in urban infrastructure is important. Whilst we are a large decentralised state, we do also have significant needs in the southeast corner from an infrastructure perspective. Because if we don't get that urban infrastructure investment right as well, we can find that our cities grind to a halt. And if you look at the outcomes that have been achieved, particularly in Melbourne with their level crossing removal program, a similar kind of program here would deliver fantastic outcomes in terms of higher frequency public transport services, greater safety, local freight movement, and then also urban amenity improvements around where these level crossing removals happen. So they're really our key election priorities. But today we're local industry engagement and procurement. So we live in a very decentralised state. Our infrastructure needs and projects are spread throughout this great state, and local industry and supply engagement is an important part of any successful project delivery. Local content is important, and it's certainly becoming more important as construction has been identified as one of those key sectors to help drive the economy forward and take us out of the economic conditions that we're in at the moment. So today we have 4 accomplished practitioners and contributors in this space: Kylie Porter, Ben Hughes, Phil Cooper, and Scott Stewart. So today, first up, we've got Ben, who's with me in the room today. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Ben is the principal of Hughes et al. And for over a decade, Hughes have provided major project proponents, bid teams, and major contractors with local content advice, strategy design, and program delivery. They focus on getting the best economic and employment returns for infrastructure project investment, particularly in regional areas. I remember very closely, or very well, when I was at TEAS, we worked very closely with Ben and the team.
That's right.
On delivering a whole range of local benefits and outcomes with the coal seam gas work that we did out in Chinchilla. So Ben will be providing some insights from his recent book on project directors' local content guidance note. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks very much for the QMCA for the opportunity to speak today. As Andrew's already mentioned, I've been designing local content strategies for quite some period of time now. And what we're seeing in the local content space is quite transitional. There's been quite a trajectory over the last 10 years around how local content has changed, and I expect that trajectory to only continue, as quite rightly you say, Andrew. The economic recovery is really steeped around construction and the construction industry. And look, part of the curse of local content is it does get caught up in that jobs narrative. It does get caught up in the political narrative, and we're just seeing a lot of newspaper headlines: jobs, 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 local, local, local. But when you actually peel it back a bit and start to look at some of the things that are happening, particularly in Canberra, but also across most states at this present moment in time, there's an awful lot of change that's going to be happening in regards to the frameworks that industry is going to be required to comply with. Defence just announced that they're going to review their Australian industry plans. If you listen to the whispers, down in Canberra, the Department of Industry will be doing the same around Australian industry plans, and we're seeing a lot of governments come out at this present moment in time to change policies. And so there's a lot happening at the moment, and also principally what we're seeing is the schedules of local content, which used to be kind of in Schedule 7 in the dusty backwaters of the contract somewhere, are now being revised and brought forward. And I know there's quite a lot of work happening with a few of the legal companies around how to get better contracts, because the reality is at this present moment in time is local content doesn't set the constructor up for success. And right in the middle of that is the project director and the project director's team of the constructors, who very often are the last link of the chain in terms of the delivery of local content. And I guess that's what sort of inspired me a bit to sort of write the guidance note. It's for free, it's on my website, anyone can go and download it, because what we're seeing is a lot of project directors and their teams who went to university or went to TAFE to qualify on how to build a construction, and now they're effectively being asked to, how do we actually re-engineer an economy? And there's going to be huge scope creep in this. There's going to be huge requirements coming around. And it's very important that we as an industry start a conversation about what is local content and how do we define it, especially in regional areas. And the external market will have its own influences, but what we can't always control that. But what we can control is what we do internally. And that's the reason that we put together the guidance note. On the next slide, we've got, just to break it down, luckily I don't have to put my own diagrams together now, I just take pages out of the local guidance note. But really what we did is we tried to break it down with 3 goals in mind. And that was to say that local content is very, very complex and holistic, and we'll talk about that in a second. But by and large, most construction companies right now today are in a position where they're having to change strategy, and they don't have time to do it. So what we've tried to do is break it down to some actionable templates that the project director who's in a real rush can access, and effectively run a workshop, define a job description, and write a really good industry plan based around these four different sections, and ultimately for the actionable stuff they can put together their strategy in 5 hours and less. We've also broken down the topics for internal discussion as well, and each topic you can navigate around, you can drop in at links. They're sort of 1 or 2 pages long at most. And like I said, they're really there around to start an internal discussion, but we framed it around what we call a LEAP plan. So rather than local industry participation, we're seeing it as local economic alignment participation as well, because there's a broader requirement for local content to engage. And so when you jump into the guidance note, you'll be able to sort of navigate yourself around those sections on that LEAP plan and put together that LEAP plan. On the next slide, however, we continue this thinking around local content LEAP, and because very early on in the document, what we're talking about is the need for a fundamental shift in the way that industry thinks about local content, not to leave it as the sort of the last link in the chain. Local content can't be delivered by a construction and procurement team who's already been given the scope of work that they've got to go and purchase when they're being asked to look for innovation. It can't be delivered by subcontractors from an employment point of view who might not have the longevity of scope. And it's certainly, from a communications point of view, it's really important that communications in the market with external stakeholders is accurate, but early. And so what we're saying from a LEAP point of view is that we need to bring local content a lot further forward. We need to be setting the constructors up for success, and that framework needs to be done actually through approvals by the proponent, by the clients, and ultimately by the designers as well. Because at the end of the day, local content, if you could put it in a nutshell, isn't necessarily about buying, it's actually about shopping. It's about going to the market, testing the market, understanding what skills and capabilities are out there, and then understanding where you can put that innovation into your supply chain to be procured later on down the line by the people who have to do the procurement. So we really need people to think about bringing local content forward, and then once you're able to bring it forward in the whole project life cycle, what you're able to do is then contractually set the constructor up for success. And provision for it effectively within a budget, put it correctly in a contract, and make it very clear on what you want the constructor to execute to be able to hit your local content goals. On the next slide, we detail that a little bit more within the guidance note about how do you best position local content in the program of delivery, not just in the full project life cycle as well. And what we've done is we've broken that down again into this LEAP structure, local economic alignment and participation. And we try and show how local content actually transitions through the life of the program. So to a certain extent, we actually believe that it should be put in the project manager's office because it's a centralized function. And we need to ensure that things are linked. So You can't make decisions about how you unbundle engineering packages if you don't understand the impact that's going to have on the construction strategy. You can't go and procure in a region if then you've got a concern that those regional subcontractors can't get labour. And certainly your points around industrial relations also resonate very heavily throughout local content as well. And it's really important to bring it forward and then create that business case around what local content is, get that aligned, and then once the contract is awarded, then it becomes a method of delivery that's already been prepared. On the next slide, we've got one of the diagrams we've got in the book is just trying to explain how local content is a lot more holistic these days. The expectations are a lot broader, and it's the role of the local content advisor to actually gather up those strands, those individual strands of functions within the project, and actually pull them together into its own local content function. And it's very much, you know, if you've got a green thumb, permaculture. Right, everything has an equal and opposite reaction with each other, and each different system and function needs to support each other as well. So, again, local content is really about gathering up those strands and putting together a holistic approach to what local content strategy actually means. And then on the next slide, what we're talking about at the moment, and this is the moves that we're seeing a lot in the marketplace, is that if you were to centralize what local content is, there's a lot of compliance requirements that sit around it, a lot around policy, a lot around establishing market value, how can we develop economies, how can we get reliable workforces, and how can we actually get design and innovation in. But what clients are going to be wanting you to do is also push out into innovation now. There's a lot of known innovation in the marketplace, there's a lot of government programs that go on, and certainly around advanced manufacturing and METs and OSTMine and supplier development and worker development. They're going to really want industry to push out and start to engage with those external stakeholders, which I think is really smart, because local content is a shared responsibility. At the end of the day, the program of works has to be delivered, and the asset needs to be constructed, and it's up to the market to actually give value back to the project. And so what clients are going to want to see is us reaching out into those different sectors of development where there's already known innovation, and really engaging with that, but then also pushing out even further and finding out where the unknown innovation is. The Weekend Australian a couple of weeks ago pointed out that they think somewhere around 40% of, there's going to be an increase about 40% of onshore manufacturing coming into the marketplace, and they're saying, well, we can't get it into the cities, they're jammed, how are we going to put it into the regions? And so in that case, what we've got to do is find new ways of thinking about local content, about engaging suppliers, about moving labour and engaging skilled workers. And so the client's going to be really wanting us to push out in that innovation. And again, that takes time, because innovation means risk, and you can't be turning up on day one of a construction project and go, hey, I've got a new widget that goes bing, and expect the engineers to be happy about that. That was probably a conversation 2 years previous. So it's really important that we bring it forward. Just on the final couple of slides here, one of the biggest risks and one of the biggest opportunities with local content is that it's seen very closely as part of the social agenda, part of a social license to operate piece. And one of the phrases that we've developed in this is actually there's an economic license to operate as well. It's not to devalue social license to operate, and anyone who knows me I'm very passionate about getting social dividends from any practices we do, especially around things like disabled workers and veterans, things that are personally important to me. And working with a really strong community team, which I've done on a number of occasions, has been a real privilege, and you get some real access to stakeholders and so on and so forth. But the other side of that ledger is also, you know, and maybe because I saw it on telly last night, is the utopia, right? Is the, you know, the big good news stories that don't really actually stack up on the ground, and so on and so forth. And the truth is always in the middle, but also so is jobs and contracts. But as we see on the slide there, and again, go in and download the guidance now, it's really important that we delineate between what social license to operate is and what economic license to operate is. You know, we've got to ask ourselves as an industry, how much societal change do we need to actually make, considering we're just here to build a road or a bridge or a mine or a gas plant? But then on the other side of life, we've got to also say, but there's some real economic agenda that we need to drive. There's some real economic recovery, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, Andrew. And it's really important that we focus on jobs and economic growth, jobs and contracts as a lever to economic growth as well as societal growth as well. So, and they've got different drivers, and again, go in and have a read and start that discussion internally. And then just the final slide is really just to conclude some points before we sort of hand over, is to say there's a lot of stuff happening at the moment in this policy environment. There's a lot of changes that are happening, and a lot of it's going to be outside of industry's control. And to a certain extent, it's our responsibility as local content advisors to insulate the program and the project from a lot of those expectations, both realistic and unrealistic. But what you can do right now is really understand what local means to your project. There's so many definitions of local out there, depending on which state you go to and which part of the project you're in, and so on and so forth. You're not going to change that. You're not going to change policy overnight. But what you can do is actually get your own internal local content definition. And that's what we're really trying to do here, is number one, start that conversation. Not necessarily with us, but with yourselves. Define your own local content. There's some templates in there that will help you run workshops and help you actually document what that actually means. But then second of all, also, when you're thinking local, think about, especially in regions, when you're going to those regions, what they define as local and how you can actually plug into that region and benefit from a lot closer engagement. So yeah, so download it, start your discussion internally, and you know, get ready for that transitional change of local content.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. And we've got a couple of questions coming through already, so feel free to write them up on the Q&A side of your Zoom conferencing. That really good introduction. Thanks, Ben. And good, interesting segue into some economic side of it. So our next speaker is Kylie Porter. Kylie's the Chief Executive of GW3 that represents the Queensland Local Content Leaders Network. The Queensland Local Content Leaders Network has released its recommendations around after the group commissioned research project to develop a better answer to the question of what is local. And keeping in the regions, a better practice model for local content and defining local business was developed in response to a 2018 House of Reps Standing Committee inquiry into mining and the resource industry support for business in regional economies. So GW3, headed by Kylie, is an independent regional economic development body that represents and advocates for the Mackay, Isaac and Whitsunday region. So welcome, Kylie, and we'll hand over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew, and hey, Ben in Brisbane. Thank you for that nice introduction. My name's Kylie Porter. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Greater Whitsunday Alliance. As a bit of a side gig, I also participate in the Queensland Local Content Leaders Network. We're actually a coalition of economic development bodies, industry groups, local councils who come together on a fairly regular basis to actually work out how we can maximise local supply opportunities for our regional communities. So I love talking to groups, particularly ones that are based in southeast Queensland. You know, it's a really nice opportunity to point out some really clear differences between regions and metropolitan areas, because you know the way that we approach local is often very different to the way that major contractors or major companies or even local government departments view local as a definition or a region as a geography on a piece of paper. The reality is often incredibly different. I'll just share my screen and I'll take you through, if I can find my screen, if I can find what I'm actually looking for today. And I can't find all my windows. There we go. I've clearly got too much open today. There we go. So, you're exactly right, Andrew. We commissioned a study, the Queensland Local Content Leaders Network, back last year. We wanted to be able to address exactly what was a better definition of local and also a better practice model for applying you know, some local content policy. So what did we do? We went out, we commissioned a report. We've had that report sitting with us now for a few months, and we're working through the process of socialising it and engaging with some key stakeholders, particularly government and ministers. And now we're taking it to, to industry to be able to embed it really directly with them. So what does the report highlight? The report, there's no surprises here. You're all going to be incredibly shocked when I tell you what the first thing is. And I'm sorry, I've got a slow computer this morning. You've got to love regional Queensland internet. Regional Queensland is very different to procurement in metropolitan areas. Surprise, our region and the region that I represent actually has a geographical footprint of 90,000 square kilometres. So when we actually look at the Queensland government's definition of immediate local, and they drop a pin and they say, within 150 kilometres, that's local, that doesn't apply very well in my region. So as we move out to areas like Claremont or even further beyond, 125 or 150 kilometres may actually capture 200 people in total. Yet there are major projects and major mining opportunities which are happening in those regions. So it's not really, one size definitely does not fit all. And the Queensland Local Content Leaders Network is about highlighting that, the issues that we experience in regions are very different to what metropolitan or southeast Queensland may see as being, pretty standard and pretty simple to solve. So selecting that narrow kilometric boundary on immediate local means that we are losing significant local spend from our regions. So again, I'll use my region as an example. The Carmichael Mine Project, or Adani as everybody refers to it, immediate local really means that the vast majority of spend will be lost to our region if they don't apply a more broader definition of what could be regarded as local. So, there's a lovely community out there in Alpha, and there's another lovely community in there, called Claremont. But the reality is that the vast majority of procurement opportunities won't be able to be supplied from those two townships. So we need to make sure that we actually broaden that definition of local procurement zones to make sure that regional Queensland has the opportunity to engage in local procurement or major procurement opportunities. And I can't stress that enough. This is actually about becoming less parochial. So it's not about Mackay receiving the benefit from a Mackay project. It's about my broader Mackay, Isaac Whitsunday region receiving the benefit, from a regional project. So regional Queensland needs to limit the amount of supply leakage through a more effective and local content model. So what did we actually do? So you're going to have to go with me on this. I'm going to step you through the six tiers of a model that we're proposing. So model number one is immediate local. So immediate local, or your natural economic zone. Now, immediate local, obviously, if you're setting up something major in Moranbah, for example, absolutely, Moranbah is your immediate local community and you should give that a red hot go. But again, if you're looking for a major piece of infrastructure equipment, you may not be able to get it out of Moranbah. So rather than make the decision to divert immediately back to Ipswich or perhaps to Brisbane, what we're actually saying is that you need to consider immediate local and the natural economic zone before you actually say, I've ticked my local content box and that can't be supplied. So now anywhere in Australia is available to me. Because the reality is, in that regions, particularly like Mackay, Isaac Whitsunday, we can actually supply the vast majority of goods, from our wider natural economic zone. So a natural economic zone can be defined by the journey to work movements. So the comfort, the convenient amount of distance that a person may travel to work or to supply a good or a service. And so the Australian Tax Office actually captures that data as journey to work movements. So a journey to work movement, again, I'll just use it in my region. We have people and suppliers in Rockhampton who are supplying, goods and services into Moranbah or Dysart, for example. It's a comfortable day travel distance. That's a journey to work movement. So once we actually redefine what is immediate local, or what is our preference around local, we start to capture a whole lot more businesses, and we start to capture a whole lot more opportunities to be able to supply effectively. Then we number two, we move to regional zones. So this is where we're actually looking at, so regional zones will be the broader ISAC, region. That's the more generalised definition of a region. This means this model can work in Southeast Queensland and not just in our really huge areas across regional Queensland. Wider regional areas, that's an SA4, what the Australian Bureau of Statistics refers to as SA4. Mackay, Isaac, Whitsunday is an SA4 capture area. All of central Queensland, so that includes Emerald, Gladstone, Rockhampton, Capricornia Coast, all of those, that's an SA4 level. Then we move to regional Queensland, then whole of Queensland, and then Australia and New Zealand. So what we're actually proposing is that the vast majority of procurement opportunities can be satisfied predominantly, through that tier 1 area. And I'd really, really encourage you to actually, break down your thinking around, what is specifically local, and have a little think around those natural economic zones. So what do we want you guys to do with this information? This is really important. We're a small group, we're predominantly advocates, we're local community leaders, and it's really important that we engage strongly with organisations like you, to make sure that, you take this information on board. Go to our website. We have a website. It's www.qlcln. We hate saying this. We're looking for a niftier name, but the reality is we're called what we're called. We're not going to make it any sexier at this point, are we, Ben? And read the reports. So we have a brief overview report, which is just a 4-pager, which makes it very simple. But then we actually have the full white paper, which clearly outlines what the benefits are of making a high level investment into local communities around local content. It is incredible the benefit, and it's incredible the difference that it will make from your perspective, to regions like mine. Reach out to a Queensland Local Content Leaders Network member and ask them for support in embedding this model into your own local content policy. So we are networked and connected across the state. We are regions that are incredibly passionate and enthusiastic about making sure that we improve the local supply opportunities for our communities and our businesses. Be your company's champion for better local content policy. Too much supply opportunity is lost from regions. In another life, I also am a director for a company called CRES, which delivers the local buying program for BHP across Australia. I have been involved in that program for 8 years. I know firsthand the difference that better local procurement policy has on small regional communities across Australia. It is often the local content policy of a major project or a major player in town that is the difference between surviving a tough time and not surviving difficult times. There is no more important period in our lifetime than where we are right now to have improved local content policies. So take it on board, be your company's champion. I guarantee that you will be able to make a difference in the communities in which you operate. That's it from me. I'll leave it short and sweet. I understand that the content that I present is a little bit challenging. I can't give you a standard 150 kilometres is going to work for everyone. That's not the way regional Queensland, unfortunately, is like. What we're actually asking you to do is just to reframe your thinking and be a little bit more elastic around your definitions of local, because it really can make a huge difference.
Thanks, Kylie. Interesting comments and observations there. I was just, as you were talking, I was just thinking about my next door neighbour who actually works in the Pilbara. So I guess you could claim Kashmir is local to the Pilbara. But seriously though, I think it's...
He doesn't travel in and out every day, so he's probably not quite a natural economic zone. So, it's daily convenient travel.
Yeah, and being serious though, I think it is important to be a little bit more broad in our thinking about what is an economic zone. And there's some really interesting thought-provoking issues there. Thanks, Kylie. And it's good to hear from some people in regional areas too.
There's lots of us. You can come and talk to us anytime. And
I love the Whitsunday area. So our next speaker is Phil Cooper, who's the Managing Director of UWorkin. UWorkin help infrastructure projects deliver local employment strategies through employment portals and ecosystems called talent communities. Phil will be discussing the recent launch of work in Central Queensland and Shoalwater Bay jobs, along with his major project and regional experience. Thanks, Phil. Throwing over to you.
Well, firstly, thanks for the invitation to speak, Andrew. So I'm going to cover 4 areas. It's not going to be death by PowerPoint because I didn't prepare one. But I'm going to cover 4 components, which is who we are at UWorkin. And if you'd like to head to uworkin.com, spelled UWORKIN.com at your leisure. The second area I'll touch on is creating a project ecosystem. The third is the problems that we help solve for major projects across Australia. And then finally, we'll touch on Shoalwater Bay jobs and Work in Central Queensland that have launched in the last month. So obviously, we've been talking a lot about local content. We sit on the enablement side of local content by building technology platforms for organisations and communities that have a need or concern around workforce attraction, workforce upskilling, workforce redeployment and workforce mobilisation. Most of our customers fall within what we'd call the intermediary body sector, which are groups that represent the interests of multiple job seekers and multiple employers. So some real examples, we work with federal government and state government on a number of projects. We work with the federal government on auto transition when Holden, Toyota and Ford left Victoria and South Australia. Andrew touched on level crossing removal in Melbourne. We built Victoria's Big Build for the Victorian government, which consolidates 30 billion of infrastructure projects. And we also work with the Victorian state government on some more niched areas. So when the Andrews government launched free TAFE, there wasn't enough vocational educators within the state. So we built jobs at TAFE. And more recently, a horrible outcome of COVID in Victoria is a rise in domestic violence. We've built domestic violence jobs for the state government to bring more workers into that sector as quickly as possible. At an industry level, we work with a lot of industry bodies. The most relevant for this discussion today is the National Road Transport Association. There's a 20,000 shortfall of truck drivers nationally. The average age of a truck driver is 53. So we bring all of the information to attract more workers to that industry. At a regional level, we're going to talk about Work in Central Queensland shortly, but we worked with Geelong around the transition and redeployment of that market post auto. We've done the same in Gippsland with some energy transition that's happening in that community. Headland local jobs and Karratha local jobs I'll touch on in a moment, but Andrew, you raised the Pilbara. We do a lot of work there with Woodside, BHP, etc. And more recently, as early as yesterday, we've been working with Gold Coast City Council in partnership with Study Gold Coast, which I'll touch on later also. At a major project level, which relates to yourselves, we're going to talk about Shoalwater Bay jobs, but we've also worked with Melbourne Airport around the third runway and bringing more workers into that from that local community into that project during construction. And now obviously not a great time to be running an airport, but you know, all the retail, all the baggage handlers, all those extra jobs that fell out of that investment. Victoria's Big Build, East-West Link, when it did exist, we built that for Capella Capital. We also work with a number of shopping centre developments, Craigieburn Central for Lendlease in Victoria, Joondalup in WA, and Orion for Mirvac in Queensland. And the reason they're important is that those projects can't survive unless they have all of those tenancies manned with staff. A shopping centre requires that footfall of traffic, and so you really need to bring that talent pool in for day one, which is challenging. At an infrastructure level, in respect to mining, we've worked on Carmichael Jobs and the original regional content strategy for Adani. We work in a slightly different format in WA, as I mentioned before, with Woodside and Rio Tinto around Karratha local jobs. So I'll touch on creating an ecosystem around a project and how we do that, and then I'll touch on the problems that those ecosystems solve. So around creating an ecosystem around the project, we give the capacity for people to register their interest on the project, and we collect data around that individual at the time of that registration. And that informs some of the local content strategies around understanding, as Ben mentioned before, if there's an ex-defence worker, their level of skill attainment, their Indigenous status. These are all important elements around local content and fulfilling some of your procurement goals. Individuals then create their profile within the platform, which we call an SCV, which is essentially their cloud resume. We then fill the platform with jobs that relate to the project that we can gather up from the open market. So we automate that. Uworking has about 100 to 150,000 jobs at any one time across the nation. We then build a a training feed around the course feed that we have nationally, about 80,000 courses across the nation, and we gather that training information to fill the platform also. We then work with the main contractors and the project leads to determine the key subcontractors within the project, and you'll see on Shoalwater Bay, we create a profile around those subcontractors so workers can find out more about the employer value proposition of the organisations on the project before making that decision to apply. And likewise, we do the same with partners that are working on the project. Most notable would be the training organisations that are delivering specific training, but there's other employment support providers, there might be super funds, insurers, etc. We then, to really build out the one-stop shop aspect for the ecosystem, we then create training, career and skills in need content pages. So people can, particularly careers teachers in regions that maybe Kylie's referenced before when she's determining local, it's to help inform the community about the jobs and the skills that will be available on the project at various stages that are coming up. And then we fill that with a resource centre, so both employers, whether it's subcontractors and job seekers themselves, a resource centre around all the information and tools to successfully apply for a job, awards, etc. around from an employer perspective. And then the final element is around the communication tools, which is we have a notice board mechanism, which means that you can release information, good news stories into the market around where the project's at, from not just from a skills perspective, but from all the different stage gates in the project, because each of those stage gates becomes a mechanism to attract talent. So that ecosystem we then plug into the Uworking network. In the case of Shoalwater Bay that we'll talk about, it was about plugging it into the local and the regional platforms. We can also plug it into Uworking's network around specific industries. As an example, we have Australian FIFO mining jobs, jobs in construction, jobs in trade, jobs in rail, hire and rental jobs. So we're able to position the project into those specific communities of skills. The output of that ecosystem is a huge amount of data, and data delivers control for yourselves as project proponents. It's the data about the registered members around informing your strategy around local content. The talent pool becomes searchable so that employers can cast the net and post the job, but they can also search the talent to find people within the local community that already have the skills and people who have declared an interest in moving to the region that also have the skills. We then deliver the analytics around job performance within the platform. And obviously you're able to then use the news and communication tools to control the jobs narrative around your project. Victoria's Big Build is a prime example. We created the brand around the total number of jobs related to all infrastructure projects in Victoria. My personal feel on that is that they should have created it at a project level. I'll talk about that. Actually, the reason why is come up just now is some of you'd be aware that on the Westgate Tunnel project, there's been a lot of media around soil contamination. So we're now building a platform to redeploy the workers off that project into the other projects that are happening. I feel that if there was a project level talent community created for each major project linking up to Victoria's Big Build, then that mobilisation piece would have been more seamless. With Victoria's Big Build, they are getting a lot of momentum at a brand level, but the projects themselves have a brand, and those brands, as Andrew mentioned before, he didn't mention Victoria's Big Build, he mentioned level crossing removal. And the brand integrity that can occur at a project level is really strong, and that's what the media grabs. So putting a brand over the top of all of that is great because it gathers up information, but don't lose sight of the power of the brand of your project. So the problems we solve, there's 4 key problems that the technology platforms we create can solve. First is we help projects to demonstrate that they have a plan and a mechanism to showcase job opportunities on the back of government infrastructure spend. That's important in the bid phase for your projects, and it's important around fulfilling the obligations that you've committed to in that bid phase. We help projects to create a front end brand for their project. And this is very important for alliances and joint ventures that have a need to create a consolidated brand for the industry. 3 is we help projects turn positive and negative news into expressions of interest from skilled talent. That's local talent and people willing to move to the region. 4, we help projects to collect data to inform their skills strategy and to control the job narrative for their project. If you don't control the job narrative for your project, the media will control the job narrative for your project. So the key message there is that we're an easy to engage platform, and it's easy to leverage technology to help solve the problems that your project is experiencing or may experience. And we collect a lot of data and information that also acts as an ongoing communication tool for yourselves to the market. So a recent example is Shoalwater Bay Jobs, which is an exciting project to have worked on. So thanks to Lang O'Rourke Downer and FKG for allowing us to partner on that project. Just to be clear for everyone, it is not a defence project, it's a defence prime contractors project led by the contractors. It's a 3-year program of work that will consolidate the jobs from the multiple tiers of contractors. Workers from the sector can connect with jobs across the whole supply chain. We showcase the subcontractors that are working on each aspect of the project. And as the platform expands, it'll become a one-stop shop for skills information, connection to partner information, and traditional owners. And we have connected the platform to existing regional assets, namely Working Central Queensland, which was launched very recently also. So in summary from ourselves, there's a lot of social dividends from a platform that we can provide, but ultimately our role is to enable your strategy to increase the availability of skilled workers at the time that your project needs it. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Phil. Interesting comments there, particularly around being able to redeploy local skills from the car manufacturing industry in Melbourne. I came across that firsthand as I worked on the new rolling stock project program down there, and how that then transposed into making sure that there were local people being able to deliver trains and trams from Melbourne. Interesting. So our last speaker today is Scott Stewart, and Scott's the Divisional Manager of Brisbane Infrastructure in Brisbane City Council. So Scott's going to give us a client's perspective of what they're looking for from a local content perspective. Before Scott does that, just to introduce him, Scott's role as head of Brisbane Infrastructure is to oversee Council's asset management, infrastructure planning, design, project management, construction, services, maintenance, waste, and resource recovery in transport planning and operations. So pretty much most of Council. Scott joined Council in 2005, and prior to that spent a lot of time working over here and throughout the world with Arup, and has got a huge amount of expertise and experience. And so we're going to throw over to you, Scott, to give us a client's perspective.
Thank you, Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So, all right, we'll run through a presentation. What I wanted to do today is, like Andrew said, just give a bit of a run through from a client's point of view, a bit of a summary of what our policy is and what we're looking for, and the kinds of things I think are important for you to understand and also kind of put into practice, so we can make the most of, I guess, local benefits and content. One of the things I think it was mentioned up front, Ben mentioned up front about a 10-year journey, and actually it's interesting, we've had a similar one, but the City of Brisbane Act from 2010 actually has five components, and one of them is a competitive local business and industry, and the others are value for money, competition, environmental, and ethical and fair dealing. So I guess local business and industry has always been a key component, but in the last year we've certainly put more emphasis on that. And obviously this year too, that's become increasingly important, and we've made further, I guess, refinements to the changes we made a year ago. So we have two, sorry, just move to the next slide. So we have two kind of approaches. The first of all is the small projects, which probably is less relevant to today's audience, but I guess the over 200,000, which is obviously a big span above that, is what I'm going to talk about today, and that is where we do have a defined measure and approach to our local benefits, weighting up to 30%. And we have a target that was announced last year by the Lord Mayor and started August last year, which was to meet our target of 80% of our spend, not just infrastructure, but our spend on suppliers of a variety of kinds is within Southeast Queensland. So one thing I wanted to explain, because I'll mention a few times and sometimes it's misunderstood, value for money to us isn't the cheapest. So value for money is a formula we use, which is basically non-price evaluation divided by price. So what that means is our non-price evaluation and criteria and scoring has equal weighting with price. Obviously the higher the non-price score, the higher the VFM score, the higher the price, the lower the VFM score is the denominator. So that's important to understand. We use both of those and they're given equal emphasis. So local benefit is a really important component of our non-price criteria. So local content weighting. So one thing I want to mention is the word content. So we do refer to as local content, but also local benefits, and it's I'll touch on that a little bit as we go along. But it's the local benefits bit which kind of, I guess, reflects the conversations that Kylie, Ben, and Phil have mentioned so far, which is think broader than the obvious in terms of what are local benefits. It's not just, I guess, the address. There's so many components to it, and we're really interested in what are the broader economic and jobs and industry strengthening benefits of decisions and offers, as opposed to simply where is someone based. So anyway, as we see here, so we have our non-price scoring. We range it up to 30% for the emphasis on local benefits, and I guess the kinds of things that we then will put in our invitations for either expressions of interest or for tenders will then define what we're looking for in that space. And the first point is, I guess, the local content or local benefit, local business component, and that is obviously the location of businesses, suppliers, subcontractors, and manufacture and what have you, which leads into that, I guess, the first layer of our assessment. But I guess importantly, when we talk about benefits, we will then be interested to understand what goes beyond that. So the obvious one is, I guess some of them are jobs. What are the local jobs? What jobs will be created? But also in those jobs, what are the benefits in terms of local apprenticeships, traineeships, development of skills of industry as well as individuals? Sourcing of raw materials, where is that coming from? Contractors, manufacturers, subbies, and fabrication. So, and obviously design as well. So if it's a D&C style kind of contract, then we'll obviously, a key part of that is also the design element at the front end. Where's that being done? Who's doing it? And what does that mean for our local industry? So just to get into the mechanics of it a little bit, so when we talk about non-price criteria, you can see local benefits there. What's important to remember is it'll be one of 4 or 5 probably headline criteria that we're looking for people to put their best foot forward and explain to us I guess what the proposal is. So we certainly try to describe that as well as we can, but what we're looking for is quite well described details of these in return, because as you know, the evaluation process really has to be limited to the information we receive, and we'll have a very structured approach to all of these as to how we might, I guess, calibrate the score and range the scores. This is one of them, but we're certainly, when you pull out local benefits, it's really important to, just reiterating some of the prior comments, it is really important to demonstrate that and explain and go beyond the obvious to unpack what the local benefits may be. And I think, as Ben said, I couldn't agree more. Really, for that to have maximum impact, it needs to be getting thought about early, because if it's really going to be a strong part of a proposal, we often find it's a core part of the whole methodology and approach, and rather than an afterthought that gets applied to the work we have to be doing. So an example would be, for instance, in recent years, for say some of our projects, overseas fabrication has certainly been very difficult for local industry to compete against, and it more often than not, big steel components just couldn't be competed with locally. The innovation, I guess, the forward early planning now with, I guess, capacity issues locally, skills locally, and competitiveness locally, we've seen in recent projects certainly comes across stronger and is presented stronger when it's really integrated into the core of how the project is created, designed, and delivered. And again, important to just make sure that's really clearly articulated to us so that we can understand that and give you this, I guess, the assessment appropriately. So this year, August, I mentioned August last year, so City of Brisbane Act, that kind of approach, 2010 was the last update. We've been doing that for a while. August last year, there's certainly an emphasis, and obviously this year, an increased importance. This is just a little bit of a snapshot, and it is a little bit out of date because it's back from July, but this was a little bit of snapshot of impact on jobs in Brisbane by industry, and you can see there's a range of impacts. I think one of the things that's important when we look at where the support goes is not only addressing the jobs that are being impacted, but also the economic benefit of investing in a certain area and what that's going to lead to beyond the immediate, I guess, the immediate impact of jobs in that immediate industry. So when we talk about construction and infrastructure, we know that is a key one to invest in because it goes beyond the immediate jobs, but has a knock-on impact locally. So we've been certainly looking for opportunities to bring things forward and invest more. But equally, we really want to understand and see how that investment comes through in benefits locally, not only in jobs, but the knock-on impacts as well. So where we're at the moment is we're certainly trying our best to bring things on and get work out there. We've got a decent kind of size infrastructure program in the next 12 months, and Metro is up and going, and we have Victoria Park coming on, City Cats, probably less relevant to you today, but 9 of those, 7 more to go, double-decker City Cats, new ferry terminals, the green bridges, Indooroopilly Riverwalk, and a range of other roads and intersection projects. So we're keen to work with industry to just find ways to make sure we make it as easy as possible for you to kind of find and pursue those opportunities and get them out there for you. At the bottom dot point, you can see securing Australian government funding. We are working hard pursuing economic stimulus funding. We've been successful so far from some state and federal programs, which is great. And we're waiting with interest for the federal budget. I think the key thing there, if you are interested or see any of those you're, I guess, pursuing, is there's a very heavy emphasis on getting things up and running quickly and getting them on the ground quickly. At the moment, they're the smaller range of jobs because they're the kind of jobs that can be started and finished. And most of those programs are looking to get things done before June next year to get that first range of impact. But I think with a bit of luck, some larger scale ones will start to come through now, which kind of once we get through priming these initial rounds, we're hopeful that there'll be some larger scale stimulus funding coming through as well. And just finally, just in summary, I guess, we've always had a local, we've always had a local procurement and local benefits aspect to our procurement. We certainly, over the last 12 months, have strengthened it. A policy was created. We are targeting 80% of our spend procurement across the whole range of things, goods and services we obtain. The weighting of up to 30%, and I guess the final point is just really important to demonstrate how tenders or proposals address all the non-price criteria, including local benefit, and the more that can be articulated and also, I guess, embedded into that early planning and methodology and proposal, then my in agreement with some previous comments would be the more chance you've got of success. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to all our panellists today. This brings us to our Q&A session, and I think we've got about 10 minutes to do that. So I might kick off very quickly with a question. I'm actually going to start with Kylie first. Kylie, obviously you've been promoting and working on a lot of these opportunities and how the local industry and business gets involved in Central Queensland. Could you elaborate on any really good examples you've seen in the resources sector in Central Queensland?
Oh, look, Ben's going to know that, of course, I've got to give, the company that I'm a director of a plug, which is the local buying program. That's a very bespoke and it's a very sophisticated local content model. Which I don't think is probably in the realms for, and anyone but a BHP to be able to underwrite and fund. I think though the premise of that program is what makes it so successful, in that it's been acknowledged that if we divert supply opportunities into local communities, we actually make them more resilient and more sustainable without spending any extra money. So in terms of your social values or your social license to operate, you're actually just spending business as usual, procurement, but you're actually having a really big social impact, and I think that if we could encourage more businesses, or particularly your large companies and your large projects, to take that approach, that local content is actually not just a social something that you need to tick off from a social perspective, but is actually embedded as a part of your whole policy or whole supply and procurement policy settings, then it makes a huge difference. So that one's a really good example. A lot of our mining companies, are working very hard. They're working very hard, I suppose, to change the narrative away that they are, that they are the region's financiers. That it's up to them to pump money into these communities for, infrastructure or social services or whatnot. So I think that all of them are coming to that realisation that the more emphasis that they can actually place on, local, growing local procurement opportunities, the better off and more sustainable that those communities will be.
Okay, thanks, Kylie. I'll quickly just throw to Ben. You spoke about, local content is vitally important, and the economic or value that comes with it. It does bring into the question how that works within hard dollar contracts.
Yeah.
And, does collaborative more collaborative elements in contracting offer a great opportunity to leverage this a lot more?
Well, absolutely. There's no question, and I think from an industry point of view, now is the time to be going back to the clients and the project proponents and talking about collaborative contracts, because ultimately, and when you're looking to define the scope, what is a construction project responsible for in terms of delivering value? What we're seeing is huge amounts of expectations, huge amounts of requirements for change, new policies to adapt, and a requirement and KPIs and targets and all these various different mechanisms that sort of are going into place. But at the moment, from a policy level, all of that's just getting pushed down into the contractors to deliver. And what they're effectively being asked to do is take on more risk in a lot of ways, change a lot of behaviours that have served them well in the past. Because ultimately the constructors are there to build a project on time, on cost, to a quality level without killing anyone, right, or injuring anyone. So those are fundamentally parts of it. The more and more the construction industry and the project or infrastructure development industry especially is being seen as this economic saviour, the more that this is going to get pushed down. And so consequently, it needs to be built back up into the contracts. It needs, and as I mentioned previously, it needs to be brought in a lot earlier. And then if the government wants industry to also resolve the economic challenges and the societal challenges, as well as actually delivering the bit of infrastructure they contracted to deliver in the first place, there has to be a whole new conversation about collaboration. There needs to be a whole new conversation about sharing that partnership approach. And I suppose just to sort of go back to maybe what Kylie mentioned, and I think she's underplaying the significance of what the CRES program does. And underplaying the really deep smarts that BHP and CRES have put into developing this program. It is based on a platform of collaboration. And it's reinforced within a contract, but it's two parties sat at a table working towards establishing a common solution to a common problem and then getting that reflected correctly in the paperwork and the budgeting. So it's a great time to strike for a collaborative contracting right now.
Good comment. And that actually probably a good segue into one I was actually going to ask Scott. Council's obviously doing a lot of procurement at the moment. You've got the green bridges out there. You've got the Brisbane Metro starting up, both talking about elements of collaborative contracting in there, which is great. You've obviously just recently done some procurement with the ferry terminals. Can you elaborate on the industry content that's worked well within a recent transaction like the ferry terminals?
Yeah. So with a program for ferry terminal upgrades, which hopefully you've noticed over recent years, but one thing's for sure, they're getting more expensive every time. But I think that's an interesting one because the pontoon elements, big steel elements, over the last 5 or 6 years have more often than not that come from Vietnam or China, what have you, because it's just impossible to compete. I think probably the key thing that's changed is that Kylie mentioned it doesn't need to be more expensive, and I agree to do it locally. However, I guess the key thing is we're prepared for it to be more expensive. So, I guess when when you look at the criteria we're applying or the method we've got now, it is saying that we will value local content and we're happy to put our, money where our mouth is, so we're paying for it. So that's an example of, there was probably on average about a 10 or so % increase in price across incoming tenders on some of those projects very recently, and that's the way we went. And I think we picked the more expensive local benefits options, and interestingly too, when you really get more and more diligent in what we're asking for and what people are proposing too, it really does come down to quite a bit of detail to understand exactly what's happening, where, who's doing what, and where the money's going to flow and where the jobs are going to be. And in a recent tender process for 2 we've just got out there now, it comes down to really understanding key elements and what's going to be happening where. And I think a key issue there is to understand that, and to understand that it's a commitment, because it's as a provider, I suppose it's important to understand if that is being really scrutinised now and evaluated and paid for. What we're really interested in is to make sure it's followed through, and that those commitments are monitored and kept in place and even improved through the delivery phase. So that's probably a good example. And I think as we do more of it, both us as in clients and contractors are just going to get better at understanding how to do that, how to make the most of it, and hopefully, build local capability. That's the aim, build local capability. So that's the key result we want to find at the end of all of these projects.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. And if you've got any questions, please put them through. But I might ask Phil a bit of a question, and this one might be a bit of a Dorothy Dixer. So Ben made the comment before about defence very much focusing on a lot more on local content and involvement. With the defence projects that you're involved with at the present time, how do you see that translating, particularly with a lot of these defence projects? They involve a significant amount of technology elements in them, and a lot of them are a significant amount of IP around them. Is there a role for local industry and companies to partner with those international defence technology companies? And do you see that happening at the moment?
I think I'll answer this in probably a slightly different way than you're expecting me to, and it relates a bit to what Kylie Scott said, is that if you look at, say, the Premier's announcement in Western Australia around moving away from FIFO and trying to localise jobs, most of the narrative around that discussion is not necessarily saying Karratha, Port Hedland have a huge supply of workers they can upskill into those roles. It's about saying that we'll do that part, but what we'll also do is we'll bring workers across and we'll attract the skills we need, and we'll embed those skilled workers and that skilled workers' family into our community. So I think there's probably 2 or 3 elements to this. Is there workers in our community from a local content perspective that could fulfill this skill requirement? If there isn't, who broadly in the state could fulfill this skill requirement? Could we bring this skill into our region, and could we attract that family more broadly? And you've got to think about the skilled worker, the decision around the family move doesn't necessarily rely on the decision from the skilled worker. It's a family unit that needs to make that decision. So you're not now recruiting a worker, you're recruiting a family. And then more broadly, okay, if we don't have that capability, and obviously Ben's familiar with this with some major projects, is who can we partner that can bring that capability in? And naturally there's a point where a drive-in, drive-out worker or a fly-in, fly-out worker becomes the only option. But it's a staircase of decisions, so that you've done your very best to contain skills, to create skills, to contain capital, and stop that capital and that brain leakage and that capital or commerce leakage from occurring. You've done your absolute very best to make sure it doesn't occur, so that the fallback option is partnering around that capability. That's my personal view.
Thanks, Phil. We do have an interesting question about foreign investment. So I'll kind of phrase it and sort of see what everyone on the panel wants to say about it, but in relation to local content. So the comment was, what's the thoughts on policy recommendations with regard to foreign investment in infrastructure? And I think pitching that is, it's whatever investment comes in, it's important that we ensure that there is strong engagement with local industry, and that we're maximising the local benefits as much as possible. But I'd throw it open.
Yeah, look, it's a great question and quite an interesting question at the moment. You know, we're seeing this globally a bit of a wave of nationalism and sovereign risk and so on and so forth, and then questions around importation and costs and is it even feasible and borders being shut, etc. So, look, fundamentally, my philosophy around this is that we live in a global economy, and to deliver the projects that we need to deliver to build the infrastructure that's going to, you know, power Australia to go forward, we need to be looking globally, and we need to be putting out there for global competition. So I think it's good, you know, and encouraging international joint ventures and so on and so forth. The problem is, however, is that by and large, at that major project level, when you're getting that foreign investment coming in, the policies that surround it are incredibly weak, and you could basically drive a bus through it. It holds all over it. And in fact, without wishing to get down to the policy sort of nerd side of it, but actually completing an AIP form as part of your local content compliance underneath the Australian Jobs Act, it actually asks you, have you already completed procurement? So it doesn't even test international markets. International markets don't even necessarily have to test the Australian market until such time as they've already determined to make the investment. What does that mean? Well, it's great for the civils and the structurals and the construction part, but when it comes to manufacturing, sometimes already the decision has been made to bring in overseas investment, bring in overseas products and services, and not test the Australian market. And that's the problem with the policy at the moment. If local content was a sport, we wouldn't play it, right? Because at the moment, what we're allowing is the opposition team to come onto our home pitch. We're giving them the backs moves. We're giving them a look at the Boxing Day wicket the night before. You know, we're doing everything in our power to actually prevent Australia competing. So for me, it's not about putting in tariffs or concessions or anything along those lines. It's actually creating a fair go for Australians to compete. And then if they're able to demonstrate that they can add value to that investment, brilliant, fantastic. It's about shopping, not buying. But the reverse is also true. And one of the great ironies that we get when we work with the big JVs is that, you know, they might be doing local content strategy and, you know, in sort of random places around the world, and they're really drilled hard on local, and, you know, they're quite used to putting in some quite sophisticated development programs. And then they turn up in Australia and they've read the policy. They say, right, local means anywhere in Australia and New Zealand for jobs over 500 million. What do you want us to do? And very often it's the Australians who will go, oh no, don't worry. Local, we'll pick up some earth movers later on down the line. And the international JV is not looking for more work, right? They're like, okay, well, that's what we have to do. And through that whole period, we completely lose the opportunity for manufacturing. We completely lose the opportunity to swap intellectual property. We completely lose the opportunity to partner with international joint ventures. So I think we work in a global trade. Projects should buy for where is the most effective for the asset that they're trying to build. In a lot of cases, Australia doesn't even build stuff that's required, but we need a policy program that makes sure that that international joint venture doesn't get the approval until such time as it has gone shopping. And then once it can demonstrate it's gone shopping, it will be what it will be. So I think it's good. But also on the other side of life, I can absolutely see why we're getting this nationalism coming through around getting more Australians working, because it's a policy failure. And actually, funny enough, there's a YouTube video kicking around where Senator Rex Fitzpatrick is pulling that apart as part of the Senate inquiry into sort of COVID-19 at the moment. We're great at attracting investment in, but we're not very good at allowing them to go shopping in Australia, and we're not maximising it or regulating it in any way, meaningful way anyway.
Any the other panelists got a comment on that?
Yeah, I think to me it's, you know, it's a matter of balance and understanding, you know, looking beyond the the obvious issues and understanding what is actually being proposed. The question was investment, but I wonder if it's actually talking about suppliers, as in contractors, competition. So, investment's another thing altogether. But I think for us, it's really making sure it's balanced, making sure you have a good way of assessing, not only the benefits of what's being offered and that actually, is realistic, but equally the impacts and, targeting it for where it's adds value. I think one of our tenets is competition, and over the years and decades, we've needed some at times. So it's these things move depending on the local and the international kind of markets, and you just got to like all things, no matter where they come from, just have your eyes open and understand what you want out of it and what the confidence is that it's going to happen. Yeah.
Kylie or Phil?
Oh, look, I think that I'm much the same as Scott. I think that there's probably two parts to that question. There's the investment side of it, which is, probably for better people and, more savvy around their foreign investment rules and regulations and policies to decide on rather than me. But I certainly think that we need to make it very clear for international companies, international proponents who are coming and winning contracts to make sure that they fulfill a meaningful local content role in the communities, in the areas in which they work, and that's about, again, applying that not one size fits all. So we need to be adaptable, flexible, and work with them to change their mind about what is good local content policy.
I think just obviously I'm going to focus more on the worker side, but Andrew, you touched at the start of the session around sequencing and timing of projects. And Ben, obviously in your advisory note, it's about getting these elements into the market as early as possible so that a local market can prepare for opportunities that are coming. If you look at underground construction in Australia over the next 3 to 4 years, it's going from a $4 billion to a $16 billion industry over a very, very short term. So when you talk about sequencing of projects within, say, a state, you've got to also look at sequencing of projects within a capability set. When you kind of force through that much underground work in such a short period of time, the market doesn't have a time to prepare the workers for that type of work. And you're not sequencing enough to give people like workers the opportunity to obviously prepare themselves for the job. So I think it's communicating to market as early as possible around the opportunity, and then sequencing opportunities so that local markets can participate.
Well, thank you all very much. I'd like to thank all our panelists today, Ben, Phil, Kylie and Scott, for your involvement. It's been quite an enlightening discussion, and I hope everyone's got a lot out of it. Just coming up in terms of next major events, we're at the QMCA, we're looking at doing 3 tiers of events. The top tier being our major projects and awards and another event, with also a series of ongoing sort of industry breakfasts, and this is the recommencement of those now. We're looking to do another breakfast in November, which will be a face-to-face and online, so a hybrid event, where we'll be talking about digital adaptation or adoption within infrastructure planning and delivery. And we'll be looking to get our networking events back on online as well. So we're looking to do 3 sort of major face-to-face events throughout the year, then a series of around 8 and up to 10 sort of industry breakfasts, which will be face-to-face, allowing that networking, and then our networking drinks probably once a quarter. So we're looking to kick those off again. So stay tuned to our website, to information coming out. But equally, one of our major partners in QMCA is Inland Rail. They have now looking to accelerate their procurement and delivery, and they've got a video online, which is how they're looking to do that. And I watched it, They're actively out there saying how they want to build capability in the region, so that they're going through, and they're running a live Q&A session today. So for anyone who's interested, please go online, register, and get involved. And then they're now releasing their registration of interest for a large civil works program, and also a rail corridor works program following that, all up the inland. So that's huge investment throughout inland, well, regional Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. And it's the conversation today is quite more particularly relevant to how we can maximise local benefit with the work that we do as a construction industry through those areas. So,
can I also add, by the way, Inland Rail's got one of the best in the business when it comes to local content advisors. Jason Manton's right in there at the moment, and I'm sure he's going to be looking for some really good, strong regional competition coming out of any tenders for any packages that go through the length of that job.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. And once again, thank you to our panelists today, Kylie, Phil, Scott, and Ben. And thank you to Struber for putting it on, and thank you all for joining. And we'll talk to you all again very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.